This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. My new book about addictions, All the Way Home, Building Recovery That Works. I'm not really a rich talk show host, I just play one on television, which made the little encounter at BC Ferries ticket booth on Wednesday, January the 1st, all the more interesting. I held up my gold card, which apparently demonstrates that I am a senior citizen, and I said, "One for Bowen Island, please." And the young lady in the booth looked at me with complete disdain and said, "Well, this is a holiday." And I said, "Great, what does that mean?" Well, apparently on holidays, just like on Thursdays, Fridays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, I gain 6 years and I become a non-senior again. As if that isn't wacky enough, BC Ferries announced only today, how timely is this discussion, that there are massive slashes to routes, not to fares, and people like me will start paying half instead of getting free Mondays to Thursdays. Our guest is Jef Keighley. Am I saying this right?
Keighley.
Keighley, yes. Jef Keighley from BC Ferry Coalition. You can visit their website, BC Ferry Coalition?
BCFerryCoalition.com.
And why would you do that? Because Jef has been way ahead of this curve. He knew this was coming down the pike. And he says he and several thousand other concerned British Columbians, especially those who live in coastal communities, have said, "No, wait a minute, isn't this one of our highways? What are you folks doing?"
Well, what they're doing is they're trying to destroy coastal communities, and they're doing a darn good job about it.
Why?
Basically, in 2003, Gordon Campbell decided that he would change the status of the management of BC Ferries and move it from a Crown corporation into a quasi-private corporation, a so-called independent model under the Coastal Ferries Act of 2003. And they mandated BC Ferries to gather an ever larger percentage of their revenues from the fare box. So over 10 and a half years since that failed experiment was first put in place, while inflation in British Columbia has gone up 14.7%, fares, depending on which route you look at, have gone up a minimum of 50% to 93% over those 10 years.
And as people are consistent, wasn't it Gordon Campbell who tried to privatize, was it the Coquihalla Highway or something? He tried to privatize one of our major routes in this province.
Yes, it was the flavor of the decade. It didn't work then, and it's not working now.
Yeah, and that's the same thing as this arm's length corporation, the corporation that allegedly runs BC Ferries. I say allegedly because it doesn't seem to be doing much of a job.
Well, it does run BC Ferries in the sense of delivering the service day to day, but it's a service provider. It owns nothing. The province owns everything. And when the province says jump, the only question that the CEO says is how high?
Okay, let's look at some of the things they've announced. Eliminating free trips for seniors on April 1st, offering half price instead. This ferry on the Haida Gwaii, they're saying they're cutting way down, if not at all. Bowen Island, which is the one I'm concerned with, only carries, they claim, a few vehicles and 20 passengers or so on the weekends. So undoubtedly that service will start being chipped away at. You have said, and your people have said, what we have here is a government that's literally turned its back on coastal communities. Service cuts on the grounds that ferry service is an initial service, essential service to coastal communities. Now, what they did is very interesting. They went all over the province and they had something like 3,700 people show up to various community meetings and allegedly got people's opinions,
Yes, they
which
did.
they promptly ignored.
Yes, they did.
So could we say this was just a kind of masquerade? It was just a kind of exercise in public relations?
We call it a complete and total sham.
Oh, a sham.
In the last 3 years, with fares going up and up and up, Gordon McAtee, the ferry commissioner, had enough common sense to realize that the natives were getting restless in the ferry communities. And it's we're talking 20% of the population of this province are in ferry-dependent communities.
Okay.
So when you take Vancouver Island and all the rest of them.
Yep.
And so he decided that with the increasing fares that were coming along the line and being told to come along the line, it would be a good idea to go out in 2011 and hear from coastal communities to see what we felt.
Yes.
So we all got together and we told them then that the fares were too high, that the service was inadequate, and that it should be repatriated back to the province. And so the government, or Gordon McAtee, put out a report.
Why should it be repatriated? There's a good reason. You tell us.
The reason it has to be repatriated is because it's going into the toilet the way it is as a private corporation. Right now, they're in the process of floating several $100 million worth of new bonds to pay off the old bonds, and they're only paying interest on the bonds. They're not paying any of the principal. And left to their own devices, they're actually going with, as a standalone company, under normal circumstances, BC Ferries is a complete and total bankrupt.
Check this out. This is the city, Vancouver, that said no to multi-billionaire Las Vegas entrepreneur Steve Wynn when he wanted to put a casino right behind us here on the waterfront.
I was quite vocally against that as a...
This is the community that just a year ago said no to expanding casino operations around the football stadium. And yet, BC Ferries Corp, this arm's length elephant, is saying we're going to put gambling on BC Ferries.
Well, in fact, the province is telling them to do that. BC Ferries is really just a service provider, and they do what they're told. And what we've said is that that's just about the dumbest thing in the world.
Yes.
I mean, what we don't need is for some parent to be on a winning jag and somebody throws the kid overboard and he says, not now, I'm on a winning streak.
I'm on a winning streak, exactly. So here's a representative from BC Ferries who says, or pardon me, from the government, changes are required as part of an overall plan to operate an affordable and sustainable ferry system. And my question is, why? Since when are highways and hospitals affordable and sustainable? They're just what we do as part of our social contract.
That's right.
And they cost us money.
And if you take 20% of the population, and let's say, why don't we simply withdraw the income tax contribution of those 20% of the population and see how well you do? The fact of the matter is, the transportation is a public service. In Washington State, they run the ferries in a very similar service at about half the price. The interesting thing about Washington...
How do they manage that?
Well, both the Republicans and the Democrats in Washington State agree that the ferries are a valued public service and an economic generator. And neither of those two parties are interested in cutting back.
Maybe they could leave Washington State and go to Washington, D.C. and help Mr. Obama and the Republicans get along.
You know, I think if the Republicans in Washington State can see the sense of having this as a public service, the Liberals in Victoria ought to come around as well.
Now, you had a demonstration on Tuesday, February the 4th?
No, we had one we're going to have one on the lawn of the legislature on Tuesday, March the 11th, and then we're going to have simultaneous rallies up and down coastal communities and on the mainland on Saturday the 15th, on the Ides of March. Beware the Ides of March.
Always beware, never leave the house. Did you not also have an event?
January the 18th.
Yeah, on January 18th you had over 2,000 people show up all over coastal communities.
Yeah, well, it actually wasn't all over because we just got started. It wasn't. We don't think it was an accident that this so-called consultation process was set up to begin November 20th and terminate December 11th as people are getting ready for Christmas.
Yes, nice timing.
Yes, they anticipated that very few people would show up. Yes. People packed the halls. We had to change venues in Powell River. They got a hall to hold 300 people and 1,000 people showed up. So people are really, really, really annoyed with this government. And they're basically, despite the fact this happened over Christmas, we said enough is enough. This is the straw that broke the camel's back. And fortunately, we're a resilient camel. And we used the opportunity of the government's own meetings to organize. And on January the 18th, on the Sunshine Coast, we had 7 locations to emphasize the fact, stretched out along the highway, in 7 locations to emphasize the fact that this is our marine highway. We were joined by folks in Powell River and on Gabriola Island. In just those communities, we had 2,200 people show up.
Let me tell you something. I visit the city of Venice, Italy quite often. And because I'm there a lot, or for a tourist, a lot, I've managed to get a Venice ID card.
Awesome.
And that means that instead of paying €6 every time I want to get on the water bus, I can buy packs of tickets for pennies, relative pennies, which is what Venetians can do. They're different from people visiting from all over the world. Why don't we have such a system here?
Well, we have
we have a bit of a
on not the major routes between Tsawwassen and Schwartz Bay or Horseshoe Bay and Nanaimo, but on the rest of the routes, we have what's called an experience card.
Yes.
And for reasons that BC or Ferries can't explain, the discount is different on every different route. It's not systematic. Yes. On our route from the Langdale to Horseshoe Bay, it runs about a 17% discount. But in order to have that, you have to maintain a minimum balance of at least $100. And most low-income people can't afford to park 100 of their scarce dollars for an experience card. So what's happening is while people who are somewhat better off can get a little bit of a discount, the poorest people, seniors, can't do that because they can't afford to park $100 of the money just so when they do have to use the ferry, they get a slight discount.
So why is BC Ferries Corp behaving like HSBC and BMO? Because that's what the banks do. The banks say, we'll give you X but you have to maintain a balance of $1,000 or $10,000 in that account.
Because they're being pushed by the provincial government to try and act like a profit-driven corporation. We're now at the point where 93% of the operational costs of the ferries are paid in the fares. And there's not another public ferry service on the planet that comes close to that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at transit, you're looking at about 40% paid for by the fare box, and the rest being paid for by subsidies because it's necessary to move people around.
So, Jeff, earlier I asked you why should the Ferries Corp be reconstituted back into the government, and my answer to that is because they would then be accountable. They would because isn't it true that at this arm's length distance and structure, nobody can reach them in a sense?
Yes and no. I'm on the Lower Sunshine Coast Ferry Advisory Committee, and we've actually found that in relations with BC Ferries management, they have been reasonably forthcoming with information.
Great.
But what they tell us is, you're taking issue not with the quality of the service that we deliver, but the quantum of the service that we're allowed to deliver. If you take issue with that, you have to go to our political masters. Give us a different contract and we'll deliver a different contract.
Please tell us where the buck stops. We're going to take a little break and come back and continue this conversation about BC Ferries. Look, this is your opportunity to say hello at davidberner.com, and also our opportunity for our lovely sponsors to say hello. These are the folks who help bring you this program here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. We'll be back with you in just a moment while we just turn the boat around. This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. My new book about addictions, All the Way Home, Building Recovery That Works. BC Ferries are cutting routes, raising prices, installing gambling, and so on. A lot of changes going on, and not many of us are very happy. Least happy amongst us are the BC Ferries Coalition that you can find at bcferriescoalition.com and
BC Ferry
Coalition.com. And Jef Keighley is very often their spokesman. Do you have an official title?
I'm the chair.
You're the chair. That'll do it. Okay. So tell us some more of the actions. What's your mantra? Call the premier, tell her to cut the cuts. Yeah. What is it?
Tell the premier, stop the cuts and listen to the people.
Very good. Stop the cuts, listen to the people. I like it.
Yeah. And the reality is, when they unilaterally announced these cuts on November the 18th, they had done no studies or economic studies whatsoever to find out the impacts. And so now we understand they're going to modify it slightly because they've discovered that people really are annoyed, and they're going to make some different adjustments, having done no studies and not knowing the impacts.
This is very reminiscent of the TransLink referendum. They say they're going to have a TransLink referendum. Everybody says, "Are you joking?" Quoting Mr. McEnroe, "You can't be serious," and now they are backing down. Do they always just float trial balloons? Do they ever just make a decision?
Not so far.
Yeah.
And indeed, we intend to make them back down because notwithstanding the announcement yesterday that Todd Stonewall Stone wants to roll ahead virtually unchanged with their savings, ferry communities have said that's not on. It's not just ferry communities, it's also affecting inland communities like into the Caribou. And so we're vowed to take this government on, and we intend to fill the lawn of the legislature on Tuesday, March the 11th, with the largest ferry protest that this province has ever seen. And then we intend to follow up on Saturday. We're going to ask everybody to come to Victoria on the Tuesday, and then on Saturday we're asking the communities to organize their own simultaneous rallies so that all up and down all of our coasts, in Vancouver, all around, people are going to be coming out at the same time on the same day to demonstrate the amount of angst and anger being directed at this government. And they need to stand up and to take notice, because if needs be, we're going to carry this right through into the next provincial election. And if Christy Clark wishes to recast herself as the Comeback Kid 2, the sequel, she can do so, but it'll be due on her own record.
Well, Christy Clark has cast herself as Mrs. Family. She's all about families, and we have Family Holiday coming up, and so on Family Day. What does this say about families? I mean, are there no families in Bella Coola? Are there no families of Vancouver Island? No families at Langdale and Seasheld?
Well, 2 days ago, we delivered just shy of 400 letters to the cabinet offices just over here by Canada Place.
Yes.
And the majority came to us in sealed envelopes, but about a quarter were opened so that we could read them. And I've read every single one of them.
Yes.
And there are really heartfelt stories about families being torn apart because they simply can't afford to travel back and forth with the frequency they once did. So grandparents or parents can't get into the city to visit their kids. Kids can't get back to visit their parents and grandparents.
Do school children have some sort of special fare or non-fare?
No, we've been arguing that should take place for years and years and years, and BC Ferries, because they've been told by the government they can't say, sorry, that's not on.
Because the reason I ask is I see dozens of school kids on the Bowen Island ferry every week, so they're there every day.
Yes, there are actually some discounts or actually some free travel for Bowen Island kids, but there are none for Powell River, there are none for Langdale, there are none for many others. Bowen Island appears to be a unique situation in that regard.
Okay, look, Mike McCarthy, who's a longtime BC freelance journalist, wrote he wrote a terrific op-ed piece in The Sun a day or so ago, which he called War in the Woods Part 2. And this is what he says about these ferry cuts. He says, wherever small tourism businesses clash with powerful interests promoting mining, oil, forestry, fracking, natural gas plants, political decisions have been taken at cabinet level to reduce or even eliminate promotion of BC's wilderness tourism. So tourism, which is one of the biggest businesses in the province,
and the cleanest money.
And the cleanest money has a lot of dependency on, has all dependency on movement, of course, planes, trains, and automobiles, and boats. It has lots of dependency on these boats. So if you start cutting back, what he's saying is this plot that you're suffering under, and all of your colleagues who are concerned about these BC ferry cuts, he's saying it's not an accident. McCarthy's saying this is, in fact, a very quiet way to shut up tourism, ecotourism in particular, and to promote the interests of heavy-duty industry.
Yes, and I think that we're very likely to end up going into the next provincial election with Christy Clark still talking about the future promise of LNG jobs, because they're not going to be there by that time, because Australia, every one of their LNG plants have gone 40 to 50% over cost, and the backers are saying we can't get our money out. So there's going to be a lot of nervous investors going into more of that.
But what do you make of this theory of McCarthy's?
I think there's a lot of credence to that.
Yes.
If you look at the Circle Tour that runs from Port Hardy to Bella Coola, and Bella Coola through to Williams Lake,
yes,
represents about $10.7 million of tourism revenue every year.
Yeah.
The government says they can save $725,000 in a trade-off for $10.7 million. The tourism industry has said, actually, if you look at the increase, the revenues there, there's a gain of $58 million. But right now, the summer, it's serviced by the Queen of Chilliwack, which in the winter runs between Earls Cove and Salisbury Bay, connecting the lower and upper peninsula. It goes to Port Hardy and Bella Coola. It carries 116 cars, many overheights. It has a cafeteria facility, lots of lounge space for all passengers to be able to go on board. And it does the trip from Port Hardy to Bella Coola in about 12 to 13 hours, depending on wind and water and currents. They want to replace that with the Nimkish, which was built to service Soyantula on Malcolm Island, yes, which is not much more than an overgrown rowboat. And it has 16 cars, and a couple of overheights. It only has washrooms. It only has seating for about 12 to 15 people. Attractive. Yeah. And the trip will be 22 to 36 hours. Now, how do you market that to European tourists that come on this Circle Tour, and you'll have to sleep in your car, you'll have to bring your own food, you'll have to eat in your car. You can't run a Circle Tour without a Circle.
So we have tourism officials and others, people from colleges and universities, racing off to the Far East, racing off to China and other places, Korea, Japan, doing everything they can to drum up tourism business and talking about these extraordinary adventures, and BC Ferries is doing whatever it can to stab it in the heart.
The government is doing it. I mean, as I
repeat, this is passing the buck game.
I mean, BC Ferries has been set up as the foil to deflect criticism away from the provincial government. The criticism rests on the desk of Christy Clark and no place else. And even Todd Stone, I mean, he's basically told what to do, and he does what he's told.
Stone is the guy I was quoting earlier who said the ferries have to be sustainable and affordable, and I think that's a complete misconception.
The only way this is going to work is that they take the ferries back under provincial government control, that the government assumes the total capital costs and the financing for the fleet and the shore facilities. And nobody's looking for free ferry fares on the coastal routes. And what we expect is a cut of at least 30% to revitalize our communities, which we think will boost ridership and the money will be made up. That will turn around the coastal communities, and it will mean we've got a marketable ferry service that we can sell to the world, and people will come because we have a magnificent coast for people to look at.
Tell me about the tourism people. I have not seen. They're not visible. Maybe they're doing something. I'm asking you, has Tourism Vancouver, Tourism BC, have these folks spoken up?
Yes.
What have
Tourism BC is actually the body that did the study that said this puts $10.7 million worth of tourism at risk between Bella Coola and Williams Lake.
Yes.
And once you get people into Williams Lake, they can go north or south and they can spend a lot of money in liberal constituencies.
What does the government do when they see these numbers? They just go, oh, well.
It doesn't fit their preordained mantra that we are going to make you pay and pay and pay. And our coastal communities are being double dipped. We have no issue whatsoever with paying our fair share of provincial highways budget, which includes free inland ferries.
Yes.
But what we do take issue with being double dipped by paying an increasingly disproportionate share of BC Ferries. So we bear almost the full burden of the BC Ferries on 20% of the provincial population, and then we also pay our 20% share of the Highways Department.
Are you finding something that are you personally finding something that I'm personally finding, which is I would go to Vancouver Island more often than I tend to. I live here in the city, because if I take my car, which is the only reasonable way for me to go, because I have to get around when I'm there, it's a fortune.
Yes, it is. Just on Langdale to Horseshoe Bay is 40-minute ferry ride.
Yes.
And with the rates, the fare increase that comes in April 4th, or April Fools, which is another 4%, the cost of that 40-minute ferry ride is going to be about $100. You can drive a long way on a highway
for $100.
Absolutely.
So have you found that you're up at Half Moon Bay? Have you found that you and friends and neighbors and colleagues are tending to travel less because of this?
Absolutely. Everybody's tending to travel less. Plus the fact that if you're looking at, if you're going to Vancouver Island, you know, almost certainly, if it's at all a popular travel time, you're almost certain to have a one sailing wait, so you're tied up sitting in a parking lot. I mean, quite frankly, they need more boats for better service, sail on the hour, and suck the cars off the dock, and people will be happy.
And has anybody been able to demonstrate that if they charged half the price, they'd get more people?
Well, one of the ferry management people said, there's no evidence that reducing fares will increase ridership. And the answer is, that's because you've never tried it.
Jef, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, pound away at all this good stuff. All right, that's it for today, folks. Next week, Surrey wants a community court. Basically, it seems like a good idea, but there are serious questions. How well are Vancouver community courts working? That's a good question to ask, and the person we'll ask will be Harry Baines, a well-known NDP MLA. Thanks very much for being with us here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Good night.